Hi everyone. Remixing and remastering. What on earth is the difference between the two? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. Please consider hitting that subscribe button and maybe even that bell notification button so that you can get notified of my future videos. So I often see or read comments from people where they get the terms remastering and remixing mixed up. So things like the 2009 Beatles remixers were far better than the new versions, or Giles Martin's done a great job with the new Beatles remasters. And both of those sentences are factually incorrect because a remaster and a remix are two completely different things. And it seems like there's some confusion out there, so I just wanted to talk about that. Now, I'm not an audio engineer in any way. I have no qualifications, no excessive knowledge on that area, but I hope that that will allow me to explain it in easy to understand terms. I'm not going to be using loads of jargon here to describe it. I'll use the Beatles as reference points in this just because they say talk about what you know, and that's an area that I understand better. So I think I can explain it to you better if I use the Beatles as my reference points here. So in the same way that you can't reheat a pie unless it's already been heated, or you can't redecorate a room unless it's already been decorated, you can't remix music or remaster it unless it's already been mixed and mastered. So I think what we need to do is just step back and look at the original mixing and mastering process, and then that'll enable us to then look more clearly at what a remix and a remaster is. So what's mixing? Well, mixing a song is taking each individual element that makes the song and really sort of giving it its own space within the recording. So making sure that the drums are at the right level compared to the guitars, and that the lead vocal is coming through nicely and isn't drowned out by everything else. So you take every individual element, whether it's the drums, the lead guitar, rhythm guitar, keyboards, vocals, backing vocals, and you make sure that each one sits nicely so that you get a full rounded band effect. Now what I've done, I've taken a recording that I've done, and it's just 3 basic tracks here, and I've actually taken the middle section from Steve Harley, Come Up and See Me, where I've re-recorded a rhythm guitar, a lead guitar and a keyboard element, and we're just going to have a look at different ways that you could mix it. So this first mix is a nice balanced mix where the predominant things are the rhythm guitar and the lead guitar, but you've just got some keyboard sat behind it. So let's just have a quick listen to that. We might decide that we want to play around with the mix a little bit, and we may want to hear what it sounds like if just the keyboard element was reduced. So, okay, I've done a mix where I've reduced the keyboard volume, so let's just have a listen to that. Okay, maybe it was better with the keyboard a bit higher. What about if we reduce the lead guitar? This is an example certainly of a bad mix where the lead guitar is completely buried. It's not coming through at all. So there's 3 different examples of mixers, of how you might mix the various elements to try and get a balanced recording there where everything's got its own place nicely. Once a recording has been mixed, then it gets mastered. And I find this a little bit more difficult to describe, but essentially what mastering determines is things like well, it takes the final mix of each song. Let's say you're putting an album together, and let's say you've got 10 songs. It will determine things like the gaps between the songs, the overall loudness level. So many of you might have albums that you own on CD and vinyl, and you might think, wow, the CD is a lot louder than the vinyl. Well, that's maybe because of the way it's been mastered, because the mastering also sets the volume level for each different format that the record is going to be available on. So whether that's vinyl, CD, streaming, there might be a high-res version available for download. Each one would be mastered slightly differently. You can't master a vinyl too loud, because if you do, then the needle could actually start jumping all over the place if there's just too much there for it to cope with. So often CDs are able to be mastered louder than a vinyl. Whether they should be or not, well, that's a whole other argument. But it does allow for the possibility for that to be done. So it's been mastered. It means that it's able to be handed over for putting onto the medium it was created for, whether it be the vinyl, the CD, whatever. The mastering engineer will also have looked at things like the overall EQ of the record to make sure that it's just sounding, it's all sounding as best as it can be. So we've now got a mixed and mastered record. It's out there in the shops. 20 years later, we now find out that we're going to get either a remaster or a remix for the 20th anniversary edition. So now we'll look at the remix and remasters and see what actually happens at that point. So let's go back to looking at the Beatles here. We've got 2 copies here of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. One of these is a remaster and one of them is a remix. Now, I know which one's which, but let's start with the remaster first of all, which is this one here. So this is the version that was released in the Beatles in Mono box set a few years ago. This is a remaster. So what's happened here is they've gone back to the mix that was created in 1967, and at the time it would have been mastered, which we talked about a moment ago. Now that that mix has been mastered, if you do that again at some point in the future, that becomes a remaster. So they've taken the original mix, they've not changed that in any way, but they've sort of reapplied EQ to try and make it sound better than it did in 1967, if that's possible. That's a great matter of opinion, is that. But they will try and enhance the sound of the album to try and make it sound as good as it can. And whether that's by using EQ, they might tweak the loudness levels of certain things. But essentially, you are taking that exact same mix of the album and just trying to put like an overall new coat of varnish on it, if you like, to try and make it look and sound as good as it possibly can do. So that's a remaster. This is a remix. This is the version that came out in 2017 that Giles Martin, son of George, remixed. So with the remix, this is completely different. What they have done is they've gone back to the original recordings of each individual element. So the drums, the bass guitar, the vocals, all the other sound effects and everything that you've got on this album. And they've remixed it, like we did earlier on with the Steve Harley Come Up and See Me, where we maybe reduced the keyboard levels, or we messed around with the lead guitar levels. That opens up a whole world of possibilities with a remix, where you can say, well, actually, let's bring out this element. There might be some orchestration, for example, that was recorded and it was always there, but maybe it was a bit buried in the mix. And actually, let's just lift that and have that a little bit more prominent in the mix. So a remix, in theory, allows you to be a lot more adventurous with what you are presenting to the public, because you can really change it around. Now, whether you want to try and be faithful to the original album as much as possible, or whether you actually want to actually go off on a tangent here and really try something new, that's down to the project of that release and what its aims are. But in theory, you can be a lot more adventurous with a remix, because you could actually remove elements altogether that were in that mix if you wanted to. So this got remixed in 2017. It didn't get remastered, because all you can do with a master is master the mix that's been created. That mix that was created in 2017 had never been mastered, so you couldn't remaster it. It was a bit like the pie analogy from the beginning of the video. You know, you can't reheat a pie until it's been heated. This was a brand new pie in 2017, so you couldn't reheat it because it had never been heated. So you couldn't remaster it. It was mastered. So that, in a nutshell, to me, is the difference between a remix and a remaster. With a remaster, you're taking the original finished product, or the original finished mix, and putting a sheen on it to try and make it sound as good as it can for the current market. With a remix, you're going back to every individual element, and you're maybe doing a lot more playing around there, lifting the drums here, reducing the vocals there, moving that bass from that side over to that side, or taking it from the outside and putting it in the centre, that kind of thing. So just to recap using the Beatles again, what we got in 2009, when the Beatles music was all sort of repackaged and reissued, here, that is the stereo box set. That was a remaster. There's the mono equivalent. That's a remaster as well. So that was all the original mixers, and they remastered it to try and make it sound as good as it could do in 2009. What we've been getting over the last 2 or 3 years with the Beatles, that's been created by Giles Martin, has been the remixes. So for example, there's the White Album package just there. There's also Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road that we've received. He's gone back to the original tracks of each individual track, the guitars, the drums, etc., and he's remade the album from scratch, remixed it from those elements, and it's then been mastered and released to us. So it's a little bit of a bugbear of mine when I see people saying things like, oh, I love this new Giles Martin remaster, when it's not a remaster, it's a remix. And maybe I'm getting more bothered about it than I should be, but I thought it was worth just trying to take a few minutes just to hopefully try and explain the differences between the two and what each one means. For your benefit as well, if you're in the shop and you want to know, what is it that you're looking at buying here? Is it a remaster? Well, if you've always been really happy with the sound of the album that as it's always sounded, a remaster may not give you that much benefit. If, for example, it's an album where you've thought, you've never been too happy with how the drums were too low in the mix, well, you might want to investigate, have they fixed that? If it's a remix, they might have lifted them in the mix. You might want to look into whether it looks like that's happened or not. So I hope that's been useful for you. That is my quick-ish guide to the difference between remastering and remixing. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, or if you have enjoyed any of my other videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. There's also a bell notification that you can hit so that you get notified when I post new videos. And then that means you'll get to see the stuff that I post in future. That would be most appreciated. But thank you very much for watching. Please leave any comments that you've got. As always, I love to have a read of them. I love to interact with you all. And I look forward to hearing you completely shoot down my theories in flames on remastering and remixing. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.